Welcome to Make It Clear, the Ukrainian Azov Regiment and the Azov political movement. This is a subject about which until up to a year ago, there was much of the troubling information and footage indicative of its racism, strained nationalism and use of Nazi symbols. The US Congress even enacted legislation to keep American weapons out of the hands of the Azov Regiment because of its neo-Nazi past. This ban, by the way, is still in force. However, we are now at a stage where information is disappearing or being rewritten by lying politicians and journalists. In the Czech Republic, the political campaigns of the government's tent movement refer to the Nazi Ukrainian collaborator Bandera, whose people were still murdering on the territory of Czechoslovakia in 1947 as a poor man. And when someone at the rally tent points out the neo-Nazi past of the Azov regiment, a Ukrainian present yells at him to read Wikipedia. And the politicians Farsky and Nerudova are silent. We've broadcast that for you too. We're going to take an in-depth look at the Azov regiment and the Azov movement today. We'll dissect its roots, its funding, its Nazi symbols, and even who the Czech government special transported on board, along with President Zelensky. Joining me in the studio is a man who is definitely not afraid of hot-button issues. Some time ago, he revealed the shooting at the Faculty of Arts to the pairs. Now he's taken an in-depth look at the Azov regiment for you. Representative and member of the Control Committee of the Central Bohemian Regional Assembly, Bend ANO, Mr. Martin Herman, good afternoon.
Hello, thank you for the invitation.
Mr. Herman, we are going to talk about a rather sensitive topic. You have gathered a lot of information on it. Tell us the main sources you have drawn on.
I have tried to draw on so-called reputable sources so that the information or those sources cannot be accused of being unserious. So among those sources that I hit the roadways when I was refreshing the information and looking for new information, there's USA Today, Newsweek, The Nations, or maybe the German Deutsche Welle, but also The Guardian, the BBC, or Stanford University.
So let's get to the topic now. Tell us when, why, and how did the Azov regiment come into being?
Well, the formation of the Azov regiment actually dates back about 10 years ago, when I am sure many of us remember the so-called Maidan, the events that led to the fall of the pro-Russian president Yanukovych in Kyiv and which led to the formation of the interim government. Na základě kterých vznikla prozatímní vláda. It was at this time, sources say, that the incompetence of the Ukrainian army as a whole, which was riddled with corruption, became apparent, and this in itself made fertile ground for similar battalions or the emergence of similar militias such as Azov or Dnieper or other such similar brigades or regiments. So they actually, in a way, which we had simulated the activity of the Ukrainian army, which was manifested in the Azov regiment in particular by the fact that they, the fighters of that regiment, who, it must be said, really have a good command of the art of fighting and are therefore brave in combat, and they managed to return the port of Mariupol to Ukrainian control at that time, Azov Sea. And on the basis of that, they were then subsequently given the name Azov.
In Ukraine, the country's right-wing militia, known as the Azov Battalion,
This is the future of Ukraine, of our nation, so we teach children to love Ukraine.
Hail Ukraine! Glory to the heroes! Hail to the nations! Hail to the heroes! Ukraine above all! Ukraine above all!
Children. Anton and his father, who served in the Ukrainian army, were preparing for a summer camp in Azov.
I don't know, I'm a little annoyed with people who working there, all kinds of tattoos, swastikas, pagan symbols like fascists. Exactly, what do you like, swastikas?
For some, Azov is a military regiment that protects Ukraine. And for others, it's the right sector that beats people like at a gay pride parade. But I think that Azov as such are those who fight for Ukraine. I think they are normal people.
Glory to Ukraine!
The whole side is sleeping on behalf of the other.
Why the generic diapers?
He was punished. Those who deal with children, all the people who are here, they have no swastikas, no SS, nothing. Maybe a few guys at the front, but not in the camps, and who are compared to the Hitler Youth.
Only nationalists can give for this country, not Democrats, not liberals, because they gave us a different culture, but we have our culture. Hail to the heroes.
I also looked into that Stanford University study, and there they give a lot of weight to the neo-Nazi gang of the Patriots of Ukraine, who were somehow supposed to be behind the formation of that Azov regiment. Can you clarify that?
It's true, the Patriots of Ukraine was actually the Fulzovka gang, which was founded in the year 2005 by a Ukrainian nationalist, and later the first head of actually Azov, Andriy Beletsky. So this nationalist and later Ukrainian politician founded this movement, and from the beginning it was a white, nationalist, anti-immigrant, far-right movement.
And it was also from this that people were recruited into the Azov regiment, or did it somehow morph into the Azov regiment, or what was it?
Basically, the Azov regiment was founded on the basis of this movement, and those people who were at the formation of Azov then are still there in new cases today.
You know, in our country, the Azov regiment used to be associated with neo-Nazi symbols. All that footage is gradually disappearing. However, in the year of the American Revolution, the US Congress issued a ruling that soldiers of the Azov regiment were not allowed to get their hands on American weapons, pointing to the regiment's neo-Nazi past.
27. července 2017. Tento návrh zákona poskytuje finanční prostředky pro fiskální rok 2018 pro několik federálních agentur. Hlava 9. Zámořské pohotovostní operace. The law provides additional funding to assist and maintain Ukraine's military and national security forces. It authorizes funds provided under this heading to be used to replace funds for items provided to the government of Ukraine from the inventory of United States principal agents. The bill prohibits funds from being used to provide weapons, training, or other assistance to the Azov battalion.
Can you name the symbols the battalion used?
I certainly can, but before I get to that, I would just go back a little bit to that Patriot of Ukraine and that Andriy Beletsky. He did later start his career as a politician, and it is certainly worth mentioning in this context with some Nazi symbolism that he claimed to be starting a kind of Ukrainian national mission to, I will quote it accurately, lead the white races of the world in a final crusade against the Semites led by subhumans. Those are just horrible words, and based on that, it's just one step to that Nazi symbolism. Of course, the basic symbols of these are the Wolf's Angel, the double rune hook used by the Nazis or the fascists during World War II, and the so-called Sonnenrad, that's the sun wheel, which, if memory serves me correctly, was even made or updated by Himmler or some of the top Nazi and fascist leaders. So the symbolism there is very clear.
You mentioned Azov in politics. I suppose there is no Azov movement in the Ukrainian parliament anymore. What was the political development of that movement? Not in the military part, but that is political.
The political development of Azov is actually not very significant, except for the aforementioned MP Andriy Bilecki, who, on the basis of the Patriots of Ukraine imprint, and on the basis of the fact that he later established his own movement, he did get into that parliament, and subsequently I think that his party, which was called the Nekodny Chorus, had maybe 20,000 supporters or members and was a very strong player at the time.
But at the moment, I am not wrong when I say that it is not part of the Ukrainian parliament.
By the year 2019 or 20, he is no longer there.
Let's get to how the Azov regiment is internationally screened. Are there only Ukrainians in it, or are there also fighters from other countries? Does it have any foreign partners? What is it all about?
No. There at the outset, it is necessary to say that apart from the Chief Bilecki, one of the important personalities of the Azov regiment, but also the one who is a patriot of Ukraine and the National Corps, is Olena Semenka. And she is basically the spokesperson of that National Corps and the head of the International Relations Office of the Azov movement. And she has demonstrably advanced, or maybe still advancing, I don't know, several trips and organized events with the king's right-wing organizations and ideologies, for example, all over Europe. So it can be confirmed 100% that there are members of other nations in the Azov movement. Even those recruitments of them became such a big cause or were discussed in the media sometime, maybe around that year.
However, today the Azov regiment is integrated into the army of Ukraine. When did this happen and how did it happen?
The incorporation of the Azov regiment, I think, took place sometime in the year 21, and it was because the army command probably felt that Azov was starting to slip away from them. So they enlisted it in the Sub-National Guard, and in doing so they were actually enabling the movement to become a potential recipient of the money that Ukraine was getting from international aid.
Has it? Let's go to that decision by the US Congress. I already mentioned it in the introduction. There it was decided that because of their neo-Nazi past, the soldiers of the Azov regiment were not allowed to get their hands on American weapons. Do you have any further information on that? When it was, how it happened?
It happened in fiscal year 18, and it came about because of the concern about the links to extremism that US Congress, of course, felt, and included a provision in every budget for fiscal years 18 through 22 prohibiting the provision of material support to the Azov regiment. However, it does not, unfortunately, apply to, say, the National Corps or the National Defense Time, which are organizations that are obviously linked to Azov. So even the very fact that the Azov movement, although it is part of the Ukrainian army, would not receive the funds that are flowing into the Ukrainian army is, from my point of view, quite questionable. And moreover, those funds may be received by organizations that are affiliated to Azov.
So now, obviously, the Azov regiment is being paid by the Ukrainian state. Suppose, but by whom was it paid when it was created?
It was more complicated there. It was about the contacts of this Andrei Beletsky. Of course, they had links to some oligarchs, they had links to some politicians of the time, and they got the weapons and the funds basically as they could, but mostly in this way.
we were talking about the attitude of the United States towards the Azov regiment. What is the attitude in the countries of the European Union towards the Azov regiment? Have you found anywhere that anyone has distanced themselves enough to say, yes, we will supply arms to Ukraine, but they must not get into the hands of these people with this neo-Nazi past?
I don't know anything about that particular position of the European Union or European leaders because I have not been able to trace anything. I think it is being glossed over. In spite of the fact that a year ago, 1022, so many people were speaking out against the Azov regiment, and I am talking about politicians, media and journalists. Now it is basically impossible to trace that anyone has spoken out against the Azov regiment in any way. What has accompanied it in the past, and that it was not nice stuff.
I know that you are a politician of the movement at the regional level. Have you detected any voice in the Czech political representation saying, look, these people here have a neo-Nazi past, we can't supply them with weapons?
No, I'm just not aware of it.
I would be interested in one more thing. Vladimir Putin, in his speeches and also in his interview with Mr. Carlson, referred specifically to neo-Nazism in Ukraine.
One of the objectives is the denazification of Ukraine, that is the banning of neo-Nazi movements in Ukraine. That is one of the issues that we discussed, which was raised during the Istanbul talks.
He didn't have, in terms of the Azov regiment and its history, right?
I would put it with a little bit of hyperbole that if Putin didn't have the Azov movement, he would have had to invent it, because those statements he made about the denazification of Ukraine are so directed specifically and predominantly towards that Azov regiment. That's actually his main excuse for what he's unleashed, and that somehow doesn't justify it.
You know, Bandera, the Azov regiment, that too has become part of the election campaign. We recently watched a meeting of the Tent Movement where the citizens of the Czech Republic were just asked about both the activities of Stepan Bandera and the activities of the Azov regiment, and the politicians present, Mrs. Nerudova and Mr. Farsky, did not answer for themselves, but they let a lady from Ukraine answer for them, and she said that Bandera was a poor man, and as far as the Azov regiment is concerned, you should read it in Wikipedia, that the Azov regiment is a normal part of the Ukrainian army. And the politicians were silent.
But I think it's nice to have someone from Ukraine tell you how it is, someone who has been there, knows Ukraine. Yanukovych escaped, right? He's in Moscow.
You can go to him there, because that's the second thing. Because these Nazis wanted to kill him, you can think what he wants. Yanukovych is in Moscow now. That's another thing.
That I have wheels.
Well, the president of Ukraine is in Moscow, so think what you want. Another thing, Azov, former ex. He's not considered the president by the people of Ukraine. He's an FSB, KGB agent, so you can trust him. The second thing, as for Azov, please open Wikipedia. You'll read about Azov, its evolution. Now, Azov is the official military arm of the Ukrainian army of Ukraine. It's not the SS when you see it, so it's the idea of the nation. It doesn't matter. Were murdered by the Banderos. When poor Bandera was in prison, mostly in German, well, they did, but they murdered you. Good. Open Wikipedia. You'll find the sources and then make up some nonsense.
What do you think of that approach?
No. Every citizen has the right to his opinion, of course, and everyone can present it publicly. So it's not so much what the lady from Ukraine said that scares me, as it is the silence of the politicians. They simply should have taken a clear stance on this. Mrs. Nerudova and Mr. Farsky should have taken a stance on this and said, no, this is not the way to talk. And as far as I could see, they just kept silent and watched, and grief.
We are talking here about the fact that even before the year 22, or rather before February 22, it was possible to trace in the press a number of materials about the Azov regiment, about its dark past. Of course, those materials are slowly disappearing. And not only that, but basically after February 2022, some of the media began to write about the regiment in a completely different way. How do you feel about that?
He ran away. My perception is that if it wasn't so tragic, it's basically almost comical. When I was looking for some mentions in specific world media before the year 22 and after the year 22, I felt like the KHC-3 veterans, how the protagonists arrived in that village where they were first welcomed with great pomp and then escorted out with great fanfare. So that's exactly the style of diction that changed, and that's the way those world media looked at it. I found a few things, and here, for example, in USA Today, writing back in the year 2015, they write about a volunteer Ukrainian unit that includes Nazis. The Daily Beast writes about how many neo-Nazis the US is supporting in Ukraine. Normally they seriously address the fact that there are neo-Nazis in that Ukrainian army or in the Azov regiment. Even Facebook has banned laudatory mentions of the regiment Azov. Then after the Russian aggression or Ukraine, it was just these statements were suddenly forgotten, suddenly changed. Facebook suddenly didn't mind. The Guardian wrote, for example, in the year 2018, neo-Nazi groups are recruiting Britons to fight in Ukraine. There in that article, the Azov regiment was called a proverbial Ukrainian fascist militia. By contrast, in February 23, the same Guardian newspaper assured that Azov fighters were now leading the defense of Mariupol, insisting that they had shed their previous dubious policies and were fast becoming Ukrainian heroes. There are years of such references. The BBC, for example, which was among the first to warn about Azov and criticize Kiev in particular for working with them and for, quote, ignoring that they wear 3 Nazi symbols on their signs. So after Putin's invasion, the BBC started claiming that even though they are neo-Nazis to Russia and their origins lie with a neo-Nazi group, the Azov regiment was falsely portrayed as Nazi by Moscow. For me, these are just terrible things, terrible changes of opinion, terrible changes of perspective.
As you can see in the Czech Republic, also in our country, references to Azov before the year 2022 are disappearing.
I think that recently there are articles that portray members of Azov as heroes, and I say again, there's probably no doubt that they are really good soldiers and that they did their job, for example, in Mariupol to a standard. I'm not questioning that at all. I'm questioning their core ends and their ideology.
I would like to know one thing. Some time ago, on board a Czech government special, along with President Zelensky, I believe, were Azov regiment fighters from Turkey. You somehow deciphered the photograph. So who was flying with President Zelensky in the Czech government special?
That's the thing that I regret perhaps most of all, because on board, I think, personally, I think that our government special, which bears in philosophers the emblems of the Czech Republic, the things, the state symbols of the Czech Republic. So it certainly should not be used to kidnap the venerable captives, because it just didn't happen. It was simply the kidnapping of the Christmas rabbits that President Zelensky, who had borrowed our government special vehicle from Prime Minister Fiala, kidnapped from Turkey. And these were the leaders of the Azov movement. They were the leaders of the Azov movement, and there was Denis Prokopenko and his deputy Palamar. And these are really the leader of Azov and his direct deputy, and their roots just go back somewhere before 14 years ago. Prokopenko was one of the leaders of the rowdies of the Dynamo Kiev football club, and there they promoted publicly catchphrases like 100% white, They sported the number 88, which is code for a Nazist salute, and proclaimed the superiority of the white race. Palamar, again, is the very original member of actually those Patriots of Ukraine. These are simply people who, as much as Azov and the media can proclaim that they have cut themselves off from their past, if they have these people in charge, then simply nobody can believe them, because what a regiment is about, what a military unit is about, it's about command. Soldiers listen to their commanders, and if the commanders have that kind of history and they're those kind of people, then those soldiers just listen to those kind of...
How do you feel about the Azov regiment or its affiliated organizations glorifying Stepan Bandera?
People. Well, I look at it sadly, of course, because Stepan Bandera is a very controversial figure of both Ukrainian history and actually European history. He fought after, alongside whatever armies were convenient for him to promote these Nazi nationalist Ukrainian ideas. I mean, he was with the Russians for a while, he was with the Germans for a while, he was with the Ukrainians for a while, but his whole life is just permeated by that Ukrainian nationalism and the atrocities that the forces allied to it have done.
And how do you view a certain tolerance of a certain part of Czech society in a certain name?
Well, I don't understand that at all. I'm even in this context. I wrote an open letter to the Austrian Minister of the Interior because it was the time when the so-called Bandera parties were organized in our country, which completely evoked me something simply unreal. I couldn't imagine anyone here making a racket out of a party and not being punished for it. But I have even seen pictures in the media of the Azov flags waving at St. Wenceslas Square with those very fascist and Nazi symbols that we described here in the introduction. So I simply wrote to him that this was clearly a violation of Czech law and that I would like him to see to it that those people here are measured in the same way. Because if someone, at least I am convinced of it, were to go out of the party and go and wave a flag on Wenceslas Square with, for example, a swastika on it, then of course the police would intervene and would do the right thing. But I don't know why that is hoped for in this case.
The police also intervened. She intervened this weekend in Plzeň, where a lady was supposed to wave a flag with just a swastika on it, and the police are already investigating her. There was an intervention in Pilsen.
And I am in favor of course I approve of this intervention. But why isn't it happening to everyone?
Minister Rakushan answered you.
He is ignoring it, it seems to me.
Mr. Herman, thank you very much for the interview, for the very interesting information.
I thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Well, and I look forward to seeing you, dear viewers, at 8 o'clock this evening when we will be talking to MP Kateryna Konečná on a similar topic and on the liberation of our country. So see you at 8:0 p.m. for the live stream.